Robert. I am the campus pastor here at the Irwin campus. We are super glad to have you here today joining us as part of what is going on. We're actually finishing up a series today, so if it's your first time, I know that can kind of be like, oh man, what am I going to be talking about? How do I keep up? Have no fear. I'm going to reteach the entire series. It's not as painful as you think. So hang on with me here in a second. As you came in, as you sat down, you saw a connection card in the seats in front of you. If you're a first-time guest, we would love for you to take an opportunity to fill that out. You can drop that in one of the offering boxes on the back wall or out in the hallway as you leave, or even better, you can hand that to one of our volunteers at the information desk, and they will give you a gift, just a way we can connect. We'll get in touch with you this week. Answering questions you have about Northridge here in Irwin, and if this is a place you want to call home, we'll kind of find ways you can connect and become part of our family here and what we do. If you are a regular attender, love for you. There's also a QR code on there. I guess if you want to scan that QR code, you don't have to find a box or a person. You can stealthily sneak out if you don't want to talk to anybody. But if you're a regular attender, that same QR code and same card is there for you. We'd love to be able to just, if there's things you'd like for us to know, if you've changed your address or email or new cell phone or something like that, or if there's a prayer request, something going on in your life, something you're journeying through, that we can journey with you, partner with you in, that we can just pray for you through, we would love to be able to do that. You can do that same thing, scan the QR code or drop it in one of the boxes as you leave. A couple of announcements that we just need to just want to let you know about. One, this coming Wednesday, we have a youth event. If you will find, if you do not know about this, find me and Melissa. We'll make sure you get into our text and email threads today. But for middle school and high school students, we're doing a little back to school event this Wednesday night, having a big wiffle ball tournament, kind of students versus parents. The students are going down. Even though there's a bunch of baseball players who think they're crazy athletic, we are going to beat their faces in. So it's going to be a good time. No competition here at all. But we're going to be doing that. There's going to be some food and things. We just need to kind of make sure we have a head count so we have enough pizza, all those fun things for everybody. So if we have not been texting and emailing with you, please come see me or Melissa. She's in the red shirt there, about 3/4 way back. You can kind of grab her, and we would love to make sure that you're in that information as well. Lastly, August 7th is our next Family Promise week, and so that's coming up here in the next couple of weeks, and it's just a way that we get to serve. It's a ministry that we partner with, and so this is going to be one of the opportunities where we bring in some of the baskets that are full of different things, so that when people are moving into homes or whatever's going on, that if they need kids baskets or they need cleaning baskets or toiletry supplies, we provide different things. So Gary will be sending out an email over the next week with that information in it. And again, we love this organization. They do a lot of good in our community, and we're super thankful to be able to partner alongside of them. With that, we talk about generosity a lot. It is your generosity weekly that allows us to be able to give part of everything that we receive in tithes that we give back out. So we tithe back out to organizations in the community that have the heart of Christ, the cause of Christ, that are making a difference, and we are able to give into and love into those spaces. So thank you for being generous. If you, most of you give online or through the app, nrcc.church/give, or you give through the Church Center app. And then some of you like to give in person. You can do that in one of the black boxes, either on the back wall or out in the hallway. So with that said, here we go. Sermon on the Mount. We're going to teach the whole thing. No. We're going to do, we've been journeying through, if you are just getting here with us in the last couple of weeks, we have been journeying through the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew chapters 5-7. And it's Jesus' really his first sermon. He's teaching a ton of people here, and he is sharing these thoughts. And it's very much, you've heard it said, but I say. You've heard it said, but I say. And he's, we've talked about the fact of, you've heard it said you shouldn't commit murder. I'm saying if you've hated somebody in your heart. Jesus really flipped things on his head. You've heard it said you shouldn't commit adultery. I'm saying if you've lusted in your heart, you've committed adultery. It's these things that kind of the 10 Commandments, this lowest common denominator, like this base understanding and idea. And Jesus said there's actually a little more to this than what you think. It's a heart issue. It's not just an actions issue. It's a heart issue. In the beginning of this sermon, in this Sermon on the Mount, these 3 chapters, there's these few verses that are called the Beatitudes. And we have been sitting in these verses for 7. This is our 8th week now. We've been sitting in these verses for now 8 weeks. And we've walked through from verses 3. And now today we're going to hit 10, 11, 12. And we started in that. And so I just want to kind of walk back through. So like I said, it's not crazy painful because it's only a few verses. I covered like 45 verses 2 weeks ago. This is only like 9. So we'll be okay. But let's jump in here. In this first verse, we talked about this Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, and we have read this verse every week. And it just says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who understand that everything in their life is relying on God. That everything we do is 100% relying on God. That in John 15, when it says, without me, you can do nothing, it meant nothing. It meant 100%. It was all on Jesus, all on God, and all on his work. And this understanding that poor in spirit isn't just, broke or, however we kind of have seen it maybe in the past, but this real understanding that being 100% dependent on Christ. And then verse 4 goes on to say, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Gary actually taught this week, and I love this quote that he used of a buddy of ours. His name's Buddy Gozy, and you'll see it up here on the screen. It just says, when we mourn with God, we're able to have a divine encounter with our Creator. When we grieve what grieves God, we experience Jesus' ultimate desire of abiding in him as shared emotion ushers in intimacy. So blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And we see mourning, and even this next one here as we jump into verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And we see mourning and meekness sometimes as these weak traits, these things that we shouldn't grab a hold of. But I love this idea that Tony Evans says, it's just the balance of strength under control is meekness. We talked about this from the idea of a circus, and maybe you all don't, but when you go to the circus and you see the elephant put its foot on the person's head, or the guy put his head in the mouth of a tiger, you're kind of going, if it goes wrong, I wouldn't be unhappy. Like you're kind of wanting to see the ferociousness of the wild. Now, you don't want to see somebody get hurt, but there is that wild. We love these animals in the wild. It's why we watch National Geographic. It's why we watch these things. We love the wildness of it. And when we laugh about the fact that certain ones want to grab the bears that are running around behind the YMCA or behind my house and bring them home and make them pets, like this isn't what these animals are designed to do. You can't just pick them up and bring them home and do this. It takes control. And it's this idea of strength under control for a limited space, a limited moment. And that huge difference between a circus bear who's trained and the one that's living wild in my backyard is a very different thing. And we have a calling inside of meekness to not be weak, but to be like strength under control. And the things that hurt the heart of God, like when we were doing our Heaven series and we talked about the saints that are looking down and seeing the anguish and the pain and the hurt and the destruction, and they're going, how much longer, God? How much longer will you allow this? We are the people in this moment that through the power of God, through the power of his Spirit, that can make a difference in the things that hurt the heart of God, that we see the injustice and the pain that's happening. We have that ability. And so sometimes we see meek and we go, oh, we should just be quiet. We shouldn't, we'll just, talk, be Jesus without ever saying a word. But that's not what God's calling us to do. And it leads us on into verse 6. It says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And we talked about that whole idea is that when you dive into the word, Jesus really is talking about an outraged sense of justice or morality. See, there's this kind of pattern that we're seeing as we walk through these things. And so the verse really could read, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be filled. Like we have to lean into this. What is the heart of God looking for? What is the justice that he wants to see happen? And how should we as Christ followers, leaning into his word, take and obey and move through that? And then Matthew 5:7, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And you'll see this quote up here on the screen. Mercy always involves action to reduce or remove the misery that has come about in someone else's life. I love that thought. Mercy always involves action to reduce or remove the misery that comes about in someone else's life. And we have to understand that, like, when it comes to mercy, that sometimes requires hard conversations. But those hard conversations are coming, in fact, in a moment when it has, like, somebody's in their worst space probably. Somebody's in the hardest place that maybe they've been in. And we're trying to reduce or remove the misery, the pain, the hurt. And that's where our mercy comes in. Verse 8 says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And you'll see this quote up here as well. It says, Jesus speaks of purity of heart, and this is true purity, not the ritual purity to which the Pharisees were attached, avoiding impure foods, faithfully performing rites of external purifications. You know, we've talked about this multiple times. Jesus continued to walk through. And as we looked at these ideas and we looked at these principles that he's teaching inside of the Beatitudes, we walked into these stories of where Jesus in the Gospels was walking alongside, and many times in these stories, it was a religious leader, it was the religious groups of people that had their ideas of how people should live, the 600 laws, plus all the traditions and other things that were there that they were trying to hold people to. And Jesus is saying, hey, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. These are the greatest commands. Go and make disciples. There's things that are important in here, but he's helping people to understand and break down that these impure foods and these rituals and these things that they've been told to you for years and years and years, there's a new law. There's a change. And you get to live inside of that comfort and that peace, which led us to last week, which we talked about, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be children of God. And to live, I love this quote, and you'll see it up here on the screen. To live with this kingdom value of peacemaking is to live as someone who does not run away from conflict, but rather faces the conflict with truth in such a way as to resolve it. A peacemaker is more than a peacekeeper. Like our job in life, and we've talked, and last week, we kind of said, there's these things when we walk into family events, sometimes we are the peacekeeper. Our goal is just to make sure that nobody goes crazy on anybody else, that we keep old auntie away from other auntie, and everything's fine. And if we can keep them all on opposite rooms, everybody will be okay. Or, if so-and-so can be in the front yard and somebody else in the backyard. And, as long as so-and-so doesn't say the prayer, everybody will be, we can work through the things that we do. We sometimes live life as peacekeepers. And there are moments where we do that inside of our family. But the reality is a lot of times we're doing that inside of everything in our life. We're just trying to keep the peace, not to help people understand what true peace means. And peacemakers aren't just peacekeepers. Sometimes it causes us to have to be able to stir things up just a little bit. And that isn't always comfortable for us. But it's something that I think that we need to understand and do so that we can live in this space, that we are really accomplishing what God wants, what he cares in this space, and what he wants us to do. And so that leads us to this last couple of verses here that we're going to be diving into. And Matthew 5:10 says this. And so we're kind of diving into the new stuff here today, and it's where you can kind of lean in here. But it says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus starts saying, blessed are those who are persecuted. Now, I don't know about you, but persecution for me isn't something I wake up every day just wanting. I just don't want to wake up and people just be yelling at me. And some of us have jobs where that's our life. You walk into your job and you just know it's like, you're getting out of the car and you're going, okay, God, here we are. Here it goes. And today, I'm seeing a few people. I'm seeing some law enforcement friends, some that own restaurants and things like that. And I'm going, okay, you walk in and you're just going, okay, Jesus, here we go. It's me and you today against the world. And you exhale and you hit that space because what you are doing, the food is never going to come out exactly right. The fitness center is never going to be clean enough. The way that you pulled them over because you were doing wrong, not them. All the things that happen in life. It's getting into this space where we talk about these persecution. And we go into this thing, and so we see persecution in this way of nobody really wants to get that. But he says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I love that parallel. Blessed are the pure in spirit, that first verse, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is wrapping it up here in this same way. And so what would it mean for us? Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. What would it mean for us to be persecuted for the right things? And that's the hard part that I think we step into. Some of us are living life however we want to live. We post whatever we want to on social media. We say whatever we want to whoever's walking up and down the street. We act however we want to in this space or that space. But he doesn't say, blessed are those who are persecuted because we're stupid. He says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. That as we walk along our path, we've lived out the pure in spirit, those that hunger and thirst for righteousness, the meekness. Like all of these steps, all of these things that we've been reading over these last 8 verses, 7-8 verses here that we're seeing now kind of come to a head here. And I was reading this and I saw this quote. It says, when we dig deeper into the meaning of the Greek term translated as persecuted, it makes it even more difficult to see the connection. The literal translation means to be harassed. It refers to being treated in an evil, negative manner. This can include insults, abuse, vicious speech, and even false accusations. And so, like, we see this in this thing, like, you know, these ideas and this fierceness of what this can be. And when you think about our level of persecution and what we consider persecution many times, what we post on social media, what we're responding to, what happens at our job, yeah, it may be something where at times it feels a little personal. But it's very rarely something to the extent of like this abuse and vicious speech and false accusations in a way that Christ and what he did for us and what he went through and how he stepped into these things. Let's look at these last couple of verses here. So he kind of jumps into verses 11 and 12 and says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Blessed are you when, not if, not maybe, but when. Very few of us wake up going, if I'm really aligning with Christ today, if I live my life every day following the commands that Christ has given me, I will be persecuted. There will be people who come in, who say something, who stand up against. And it won't be because of my political view. It won't be because of my view of supporting or not supporting the police or supporting or not supporting a certain social agenda or how I feel about military things. It won't be because of any of that. It'll be sheerly because of the fact of how I align with Christ every day. It's not an if, it's a when. And I tell you all, when I have to write this stuff, I feel like it's way, like I sit in it way more in my brain, and I feel like I'm just writing to myself. And I say these things kind of sometimes like you guys are all way better Christians than I am, and I think that you all probably face some of these things in a different way than I do. But, you know, when I get up and I walk into my day, and I walk into these moments, and I step into things, I think back through my life, and I've had a pretty kind of soft, smooth run. And I don't feel like that I have lived in a space and in a way that has caused this level of persecution that resembles what Christ says. Because see, there's these verses Jesus talks about them, the disciples when they're writing, the rest, Paul in the New Testament. I mean, when he's writing there, and even in Proverbs and things, there's these words around this idea of the hardships and the hard things that we'll face. And I could tell you all that. If you've been around church any time at all, you just nod your head. We're getting ready to start a series here, the next week that's really wrapped around that verse. You're going to face hard times, but don't worry because I've overcome the world. I mean, we're going to spend 5 weeks going through this kind of concept, this idea of what happens on the other side of the hard times, what happens on the other side of the persecution, what happens on the other side of the 40. I mean, that you see these 40 years and 40 days. What happens on day 41? What happens on year 41 when God comes through in those moments and in those spaces? And many of us aren't willing, or maybe we don't understand how to live our life in a way that we hit the persecution that Jesus talks about and that God talks about. And the only way I really knew, and I don't know that this is the easiest way, but I was trying to think, and I was even talking with Melissa, and I've just been praying through this, and I'm going, God, I just don't know people who are hanging out in America, who are daily just facing persecution because of how they live for Christ. And so if you're like me, you typically go to missionaries. And there's one in particular, they're foreign missionaries. There's one in particular that he and his wife's name float around a ton, Jim and Elizabeth Elliott. And Jim Elliott went to South America around Ecuador in the 50s, and around 1956, he was murdered. He, along with 4 other men, were murdered sharing their faith for the kingdom, for the cause. There in that space making a difference. And along that same time, actually a personal friend, she and her family were there in that same space, in that same region. And Miss Dottie used to tell stories. We went to church with her. We were so blessed to be able to serve alongside her and be in ministry with her and things. She actually passed away just a couple months ago. And I remember her telling these stories over these amazing muffins she would make. They actually called them crack muffins because they were addictive, and we would fight over the last one. Anyway, that's not the point of the story here, but they were amazing, and I miss Miss Dottie's muffins. They were great. White chocolate chips, they were so good, like a little sugar on top. Anyway, but Miss Dottie would talk about hiding her kids under the floor in between the joists in their house. And her and the other ladies hiding while her husband and the other men were being beaten outside the walls of the house, just feet away. And they're hearing this, and their heart and their desire and their passion is to run outside and try and help, but they knew their job and their responsibility in that moment was to protect their kids. And guys, I don't know. Should we be having to hide our kids in floorboards? I mean, that would be ideally not the case. But what does it mean for us to face persecution in America today because of our commitment to the cause of Christ, because of our commitment to these kingdom values, to this upside down view that Jesus had of what had been set up and done that went against the norms of what was happening in society? There are these 2 quotes from Jim Elliott that I just wanted to kind of look at for a second as we kind of start to move towards the end here. The first one just says this: "He who maketh ease his God, sufficiency his altar, pleasure his priest, and time his offering, knows not what man is born for." He who maketh ease his God, sufficiency his altar, pleasure his priest, and time his offering, knows not what man is born for. And if you're like me, providing, being sustained is something that I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with paying our bills. I'm concerned with making sure things are cared for. I'm concerned with giving my boys experiences and letting them do things to experience life and be a part of what goes on. I value my time. I value my time for me. I value my time for things that I care about, things that I want to do. And I look at this, and I think we'd all like to have an easy life. I think if we're just being honest, that's what we would say. But I love how he words this. Ease is our God, sufficiency our altar, pleasure our priest, time our offering. We don't know, we don't understand what man is born for. And there's this other quote, and it probably is one of his more famous, kind of ends with one of his more famous statements, but one of the greatest blessings of heaven is the appreciation of heaven on earth. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. When we were in our heaven series, and I mentioned this a couple of times just as we face some verses here that talks about heaven. What if a faulty view of heaven leads to a wasted life here on earth? What if a bad view of heaven, what if not understanding that how we live on earth determines our experience in heaven? And what if we don't live a life that honors God to the point that we just waste our life because we feel like, hey, I accepted God, life is cool, I'm going to do what I want, I can't control eternity anyway, so once I'm dead, God will take me and all will be good. And what if we're meant for more? What if we're supposed to do more? And I love just how that last line, and like I said, if you've ever read anything of his, this is the one that probably comes up the most. Who's no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Our responsibility, as you read through those verses, these few verses we've done, and you think about what Christ says is blessed. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who mourn. It's not these war cries that we feel like, that just like we kind of live this Pharisee, this Jewish life sometime where we're looking for, Jesus to like life and faith to come through is like just this massive fight and just a massive agreement. Like Jesus coming on a white horse, they were looking for Jesus to come differently than he did, and he came as a servant. There's these values and traits that don't require us, that require us to kind of look differently than what things are. And so as we finish up this morning, and the band's going to come back up here, we're going to be taking communion. And as we reflect on this series, and we reflect on these words and on these truths and on what God says in his word here, I just want us to think about for a minute. I want us to think about the body and the blood. And I want us to think about, I've said this phrase before, that, communion is this thing that connects us to the last 2,000 years. The men and women who have prayed for and paved the way, that have broken the body, that have drank, that have the juice and the wine and the bread, God, that they have stepped into that space. And you think about persecution, and you think about hurt, and you think about pain, and you think about in a moment where Jesus was doing communion, taking communion with his disciples, knowing what was coming, knowing what was ahead, knowing what was in store. And he willingly stepped in. And I can't promise you that if you lean into what God's asking you to do, if you live a life that you're facing persecution, I can't promise you that you won't face maybe the same outcome as a Jim Elliott. I can't promise you that you won't face hardships. I can't promise you won't face people saying some really negative things. But I can promise you that you're giving of something that has no eternal to gain that which you can't lose. You're giving of something that you can't take with you to gain what you can't lose. And so as we take communion today, I just want you to reflect inside of these verses. If you've been reading through them and you know them, maybe you can reflect in those words. If you don't, you've got your Bible out there or your Bible you can open up and maybe just reflect inside of Matthew 5, 3 through 12 and what God calls us to. Just real quick with communion, we do open communion here, which means if you're a Christ follower, you can take communion. You don't have to be a member of our church. They're going to play a couple of songs. And just as you feel led and as you feel God working, there's a station in the front and in the back. You can walk up there and just grab cracker and juice. And if you want to circle up and pray with your family, if you want to take and just go back to your seat, reflect there, whatever you want to do, that is fine. I'll move this stuff out of the way. If you want to pray, you're welcome to do that. We've had a lot of fun in this series. We've talked about a lot of things. And this is kind of a hard thing to end on because none of us want to walk out and get yelled at and cussed at and beaten and thrown around because of our love for Christ and us following, being obedient to him. It's a lot easier to talk about meekness and talk about taking bears home to be your pets, or we talked about, movies and those. It's a lot easier to lean into those types of things. But this is a space and a place where as Christ followers, we have to be willing to lean in and reflect, to lean in and understand, to lean in and know that while the path may not be easy, it's worth it. So let me pray for us. God, thank you.